Schulz. I'm a journalist at Community Directors. We educate and inform not-for-profits across Australia from our base at our community house in Naarm, also known as North Melbourne. Welcome to the Not-for-Profit Agenda, which is part of our mission. I'll begin the show by acknowledging that I'm on Wurundjeri country, part of the Kulin Nation. They're the traditional owners, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. And I extend this respect to the traditional owners of the lands you're on. At Community Directors, we accept that sovereignty wasn't ceded and this will always be Aboriginal land. Actually, we just put the words that up next to the new artwork on the wall outside that says, "We are all from somewhere," in large capital letters. It looks great. But talking of which, tell us on the chat where you hail from, including the Indigenous land you're on, and mention what you or your organisation does. You can use the chat to connect with others and maybe line up a lunch. If you keep your camera on, if you're out of your PJs that is, it reminds us that there are hundreds of real people tuned in. And actually 700 people have registered today. So I hope you enjoyed this live, which is always better, I think, or even if you're enjoying the recording. So to all of our members and to any first timers out there, welcome. Okay. So look, firstly, let me just tell you who's on today's agenda. Shortly, we'll be speaking live with David Crosbie. He's the Chief Executive of the sector's peak body, the Community Council for Australia. He's standing by. And after that, we have several exclusive video reports from the talent that we've listed here. I'm sure that you'll be quite interested in some of those videos as well as the chat with David. Right, now to our special guest, let's get cracking on that. So David Crosbie, Chief Executive of the not-for-profit and charity sector's peak body, the Community Council for Australia. It's a member-based registered charity which works to advocate on behalf of the not-for-profit sector. He's certainly well-versed in leading not-for-profits, for which he has won several awards. There are so many. The Mental Health Council of Australia, Alcohol and Other Drugs Council of Australia, Odyssey House Victoria, and he was recently on the advisory board of the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission. He sits on several other boards and sector groupings. He also writes a regular column for us, which you should not miss, and it's a great way of staying in the loop on some of the big issues for the sector. Now, we'll hopefully have some time for questions. If you've got one for David, drop it in the chat and your friends online can upvote their favourites with an emoji of their choice. So, David, thanks for finding the time to join us.
Thanks, Matt. I think we should call this Chat with Matt over lunch. I think we're missing the food and the wine and but yeah, looking forward to a chat.
Yes, well, we're quite happy for people to have their lunch while they're listening to us. If they happen to have a glass of wine, that's all fine with us. If any of our listeners are your members, actually, and they get the Daily Diary, they'll know where we get a lot of our news from. Today's edition, I see that CCA is very busy. You've raised some issues, a whole string of things. You mentioned just before this chat that one of the things that's pretty hot at the moment is those tax changes to discretionary trusts. Can you tell us what that is and why it's important?
Sure, but I want to start by acknowledging that I'm on Dharawal country, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any Indigenous people on this call, and acknowledge how much work we have to do. And if I can, Matt, just to digress a little bit, it seems strange to be doing a welcome to country and an acknowledgement of country when the Northern Territory just announced they're building a new prison for 1,200 new adults. The incarceration rate of Indigenous people in the Northern Territory is over 3,000 per 100,000. It's higher than anywhere else in the world that I can find. El Salvador comes closest. and even then, it's not even half. So I think it's really disappointing and a source of shame that we still haven't addressed the need to provide alternatives to the kind of justice system custodial merry-go-round that we've created for Indigenous people in some parts of our community. And
It just goes to show
I
how many issues that the sector is facing and how they all intersect, doesn't it?
well, it also goes to show that one of the perennial issues you see as an old man looking across all the sort of history of what's happened in our sector is the issue isn't so much knowing what we need to do. The issue is the preparedness to do it. And it's still frustrating. It's not as though we don't know what the good alternatives to imprisoning Indigenous people are. We do. We just don't implement them. And I think the same applies to many issues. Um, the tax on trust issue that you ask about, I mean, it's a bit technical in some senses, but putting a 30% tax at the front of any trust distribution to charities um, is obviously going to mean that people spend less distributing money to charities. And we go into the technical details of how that works and why currently discretionary trusts, there's about 800,000 of those, can give money to not-for-profits and to charities without paying any tax. If they're giving to non-DGR charities or NFPs, then they're going to have to pay 30% tax. And even the people giving to DGR charities, if they're not themselves a charitable foundation, if they're a discretionary trust, will have to pay the 30% upfront and then claim it back. So if you were going to give 1,000, I don't know that you're going to get TOs. So it's going to have a very negative impact. The other thing it does is highlight that most charities are not DGR, to the argument that we need to reform DGR in this country. The Productivity Commission basically said it's a mess. No one thinks it's fit for purpose. Lots of small charities, many of the groups on this call, including CCA, are charities, but they're not DGR. And it's kind of the costs and the time and the effort to do DGR are a bit prohibitive. We'd all have to rewrite our constitutions and focus on exclusive categories and a whole range of other things. And I just think it's an absurdity that the government picks winners and losers in the charity sector. If you're a registered charity, you're providing a public benefit, you should be able to get DGR.
Obviously, Parliament's sitting right now. So there's several pieces of legislation that are either approved or on the way. So there's the NDIS changes, there's gambling reforms. Those are just two of the things. Hopefully your sound will kind of sort itself out. It was cutting in and out before. But what do you think of those? Which are most important, or are they as important as each other? And what kind of influence do you think that'll have on the sector?
Look, I think they're all important to many people, and I think the issue is often how well we've been able to advocate, and even then, how well the people opposing us or with counter interests have been able to advocate, particularly in the case of areas like gambling and alcohol and drugs and pharmaceuticals and areas where think about the environment and fossil fuels, areas where there's huge amounts of money being made through an industry, but it's creating harm, and we want to try and reduce that harm. You'd like to think that politicians represent the communities that they're elected by and represent public interests, but that's not always the case. And gambling's a classic case in point. I find it absolutely amazing that we are the leading losers in the world per capita. The level of tax paid by gambling companies is almost non-existent. the benefit to our community is incredibly limited. And I think the way that the gambling industry prosecutes its case, it not only offers inducements to losers so that they'll lose more. And, I've met and talked with somebody who's now in prison who uh, had over $3 million of free inducements, free bets given to them after they tried to stop gambling. I just find it incredible we allow these predatory companies to operate, and we think that that's okay. I think the issue around NDIS is a bit more complex, because there's a history here where states and territories basically pulled back when the NDIS was established and reduced their levels of support. And it's overburdened the NDIS in a number of ways. And now the federal government's trying to claw that back in some ways. I don't think the way they've done it is particularly effective or good, in terms of still focusing on meeting the functional needs of people with disability. And I think there'll be a lot of work to be done, particularly at an advocacy level, to try and ensure that people don't fall between the two cracks, or the crack that we've now created between state and territory services and the NDIS. We're saying that state and territory services are going to pick up some of the people who may no longer be eligible for NDIS, but the programs and services to pick them up don't seem to be in place. So, I think there's going to be a lot of work for advocates and others around that.
Actually, talking about the work for advocates, I can almost hear the chants from all the people on this call, chanting, "Why are we waiting?" referring to, of course, the government's response to the Productivity Commission into doubling philanthropy by 2030, a formal response to the not-for-profit sector development blueprint, and many other reports and inquiries that show what's needed to make this sector work. What's holding all this up?
Well, the same thing that I think has always held us up, and I think there are three aspects to that. As you know, Matt, I've written on this a fair bit. I've talked to people about it and run various kinds of campaigns around many of these issues. I think the first issue is that as a sector, we are very good advocates, but we're very good advocates for our cause, not for our own sector. So, that we were just talking about gambling and disability. There are very good advocates advocating for gambling reform and for better disability services that work more around the function of individuals. Those same organizations don't advocate for themselves or for their sector. So if they were at a pre-election political meeting in their local electorate and were going to ask a question of all the candidates, the people from disability are going to ask about access to disability services. They're not going to stand up and say, we need more resources to deal with cybersecurity or data privacy or the capacity to train our staff or do an energy transition, and invest in our infrastructure and capacity and evaluation and potential mergers and all the work that we're being told as a sector we need to be doing. Who funds that and how is that funded? And how can we realistically expect charities to meet all these many requirements from authorities and others when our primary issue as advocates is the cause? We stand up and talk about our cause. We talk about disability. We talk about gambling. We don't talk about how the Alliance for Gambling Reform is incredibly underfunded and needs a lot more resources, and needs support in all the critical areas. And it's interesting because next to us, the next person to stand up in that pre-election forum will probably be someone from small business talking about how they need help with cybersecurity or with AI adaptation and adoption or energy transition. And you know what? They get programs in those areas. And when I talk to politicians about why small business gets all these every single budget, there will be announcements to the benefit of small business. And they tell me that every pre-election forum they go to, someone from small business stands up and asks for these things. In fact, multiple people from small business will stand up and ask for these things. Our sector doesn't stand up and ask for these things. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we have very little data on what actually happens in our sector. Um, I read an article this week, and I want to acknowledge that the role that community directors plays and the role of community advocate. I don't know where we'd be as a sector if we had no journalists like you, Matt, and Nico, providing information back to the sector, and it's a really critical resource for the sector, and that's why I try and support it and write for it. I think we need to share more information about what's happening across our sector, and there are very few platforms to do that. And the fact that our community has invested in that, I think we should never take that for granted. And I acknowledge the work that you do, Matt, and Nick, and Dennis and Kathy and the team who make all these kinds of things possible. But I wrote an article this week where I managed to get some figures from actuaries working in a pro bono capacity for us, showing that the average length of a contract from the Commonwealth Government going into over 15,000 charities was 12 months. It hasn't changed since 2019. No one thinks funding organisations on a 12-monthly basis enables them to invest in their capacity to do the kinds of things that organisations need to do to not only sustain themselves, but to improve and get better. I mean, it's a broken system. We're set up to fail, and the government's at the heart of it. The same government that tells us and sets the rules about how much we get paid, what we have to report, the level of evaluation. Sorry, I have a bit of a cold. The level of evaluation, the level of disclosure. They set all the rules, even the terms under which we can employ people. They tell us they're only going to give us 12-month funding, and then tell us that if we've put our staff on contracts for 2 contracts already, short-term contracts, 12-month contracts, because you only had 12 months funding, and then you employ someone else for another 12 months. If you're putting them on another contract for the third time, you have to make them permanent. Even if you've only got 12 months funding or 6 months funding or 3 months funding, whatever it is, you have to make them permanent. I mean, it's kind of the way in which we're treated and the experience of the sector is simply not well documented. And so data is for me really critical, Matt. And the third thing is we're not great at collective advocacy. I mean, the solution to a lot of these things is working more collectively together. But, we don't tend to think of ourselves as a sector that needs to advocate for itself. And as a consequence, we have no home in government. There's no Department of Charities and Not-for-Profits. There's not even a single bureaucrat employed at the federal government level whose role it is to monitor and support our sector in the same way that, say, small business or agriculture or mining or tourism all have whole departments with, employed people who are monitoring, developing economic options for that industry. We don't have a single person. So when government changes, in all those other areas, there'll be incoming briefs prepared. We don't have an incoming brief for any new Minister for Charities because there's no one to prepare the brief. So I think those 3 things, our advocacy for cause, the lack of data, and the lack of collective investment in advocacy are all holding us back. And it means that, if I'm in Treasury and I'm looking at 2 proposals, and one comes from the Small Business Council and one comes from the Community Council for Australia, I'm going to support the Small Business Council one because politically and in other ways it's seen as more important.
Actually prompted by some of the commentary you've had before, I'd love to sort of throw to a poll that we've produced that addresses this very topic that you're talking about in terms of the sector's ability to advocate for itself. The best way to deal with that poll on your screen is to vote, it will, well, hopefully, it gives us a bit of a sense of what kind of work that some of the not-for-profits out there are doing. Now, David, I know that you've had good dealings with both the minister and his opposite, Dean Smith, the senator. That seems productive. I mean, that they take a different tack, though, don't they? You mentioned this recently, where Senator Dean Smith is using some of the processes in the Senate to kind of advocate for not-for-profits and charities in a different kind of way. Perhaps you can explain exactly what that's about.
Oh, well, I think it's about a few things. Most people will realise that the government has a thumping majority in the lower house. So the deals are done in the Labor caucus room. So it's your power in the caucus room because, once the Labor Party decides something, it will pass the lower house. They've got the numbers. And so what matters for our minister is how much power they have in the caucus room. Unfortunately, I think Andrew is one of the best charities ministers ever, in not only in Australia, but probably around the world. Very few people have studied under Putman and written books on community connectedness and are as engaged with the sector as Andrew is. The problem is that Andrew's also an unaligned member in the caucus, and the political power he has to influence things is based on his own skills and abilities and merit. And in politics, those things don't always weigh as much as we might think they should. The Senate's a very different beast. The Senate, the government cannot get legislation through without collaboration, voting from other parts of the Senate, crossbenchers, the Greens, the opposition. But it also means other motions can be got up by parties. So if you're a senator, you're much more active in the political process of negotiating legislation that comes to you from the lower house. And it gives you many more levers. Today, in Daily Diary, for instance, we talked about the order to produce documents, which is a senator can go into the Senate and say, I want the disabilities minister to produce every document about how they've negotiated with the states around the cost of the NDAs, and they have to provide it. And so when we were struggling with the fixed term contract issue, Senator Dean Smith went into the Senate and prepared an order to produce documents for every dealing that the Minister for Employment Relations had around fixed term contracting and charities. Now, the government didn't want that order to produce documents, so they started negotiating with Senator Dean Smith about what it was that he was after. In a similar way, today is the tabling from the Selection of Bills Committee. The Selection of Bills Committee in the Senate determine which bills get sent off to committees, standing Senate committees. So it's really which bills get significant scrutiny in the Senate. If you can get your bill sent off to, or your issue referred off to a committee and they have an inquiry, there'll be a report. So again, Senator Dean Smith around the fixed term contracting was able to get up the proposal to have an inquiry, even a half-day inquiry by one of the Senate committees. Now, the government didn't want that, so they're prepared to negotiate with Senator Smith, which enabled us to negotiate with the government in a way that we couldn't when the bill was in the lower house. We were just another vested interest along with the unions and a whole range of other people. So I think it's important for the sector to recognise that the Senate is an opportunity. And people like Senator Dean Smith, who's the shadow Charities Minister, he's been in the Senate quite a while. He understands the processes. He was a Liberal Party whip, which means He was really the person that went around and got the numbers for each vote. He understands the process so well that if you can work constructively with people in the Senate, and need not be Senator Smith, there are other crossbenchers and others who understand Senate processes very well, you can often get increased scrutiny and the capacity to amend and change legislation that's passed through the lower house. So it's a different strategy, it's a different set of tactics, but we should never underestimate the opportunity we have as advocates to use the Senate to highlight our issues and try and get changes to the legislation that we want.
Well, it just goes to show that not-for-profits and charities need to be kind of reasonably savvy as far as the way that they deal with government. We've got a lot of resources around that kind of stuff, and we've done special editions on those topics. And if you can see the results of the poll there, you'll see that like nearly half of our respondents haven't spoken to an MP since the election, and you know, as some of the people in the comments are saying, that actually it's really hard to get to speak to them. And I suppose this kind of segues into a couple of your different campaigns. You've got the Let Charities Speak campaign, which is all about sort of enshrining that ability to advocate in law, and also your Australia We Want campaign, which is all about raising the profile of not-for-profits. I feel like these are kind of related but separate campaigns.
Yeah, look, I also want to, while I have an opportunity, I guess, pay tribute to Christian Seibert and others who were involved in getting the 2013 Charities Act up. I was sitting in the Senate when that finally went through, and I know Christian at the time was a senior advisor to David Bradbury, the Assistant Treasurer, and Christian was sitting in the observers box in the Senate. We have some of the best protections, if not the best protections, for charity advocacy in the world. We can advocate. It's part of our charitable purpose. There's a whole range of reasons for that, one of which is the Aid Watch case. Aid Watch were an organization that didn't actually provide any aid, but what they did was advocate for the government to spend more on foreign aid. So they were a purely advocacy organization, and they eventually won a case in the High Court that said they were charitable, and we wrote that into legislation. So you can advocate, and that can be the way you fulfill your charitable purpose in Australia. If you go to England or the US or Canada, you can't advocate fully. You know, you have to, there's limitations on how much you can advocate for national policy change. So we're in a really good position in many ways. We need to protect that position because it's constantly under attack. I notice the Institute of Public Affairs put out a report today arguing that there was too much money going to support advocacy from government. It seems a bit ironic to me because the Institute of Public Affairs is a formally registered charity that has DGR status. So it offers tax deductibility to Gina Rinehart and others who fund it. So it's providing millions of dollars of taxpayer subsidies back to rich people to enable it to pursue a political agenda. And yet it's complaining about funding going to disability groups and migrant advocacy groups and other groups. But we actually can legally be advocates. It's been an issue for a long time. We constantly have to defend it. And I should just tell you an amusing story about this, because I'm conscious I'm just sort of prattling on. So the Let Them Speak campaign is really about protecting advocacy. And for me, at one stage, Senator Canavan and a couple of others got up an inquiry trying to get environmental groups deregistered or not allowed to do advocacy. And it's Liberal Party policy that they only fund environmental groups that actually work in the environment rather than advocate. And Senator Canavan held up some scorecards from his electorate where one of the environment groups had ranked people according to their environmental credentials. And he said, look, this is just people being rat bags, isn't it? I mean, these organisations are just being rat bags. And I looked back at him in this inquiry and I said, yes, they're being rat bags, you're right. And you're a rat bag. And so are the people sitting next to you. And thank God for rat bags, because without rat bags, we wouldn't have had the Magna Carta and we probably wouldn't have parliaments. And I think the whole notion that advocacy is a negative thing for our community is something that we need to fight back against. The Australia We Want stuff is really us recognising that, I mean, there's a long history to Australia We Want that I won't go into. But what we're trying to do now, Matt, is bring community groups together more. We see that as the antidote to the sort of, divide people approach of some political parties, the sort of grievance parties. And we think the more we can bring community groups together and local charities and not-for-profits together and recognise our common agendas and work together around those, and use that even politically over time as we go into the 2028 election, the more we can do that, the more social cohesion we'll have and the stronger our sector will be and the more valued our work will be. I mean, the antidote to division is actually bringing people together, and that's what our sector really does. So I think our work needs to be highlighting the role of charities and not-for-profits in our community, and then bringing them together to recognise that collectively we are so critical across this country, and using that critical mass of smaller organisations to try and drive some of the reform agendas that seem to get stalled.
Oh, well, that's fantastic, David. Great note to finish on. And we will be doing some reports about your Australia We Want tour to Castlemaine, which is, or Castlemaine, some people will say. And also rat bags. I think that's a word for the day. People can embrace that. So thank you, David, very much for your time. I know that we could go probably for hours and we would find out so much more. But we'd like you to hang around if you can. And we've got another poll actually coming up later. You'll also get the recording, so you can always catch up later. But everyone, please give David a round of virtual applause. Thank you very much, David.
Thanks, Matt. We can order dessert now, can we?
All right, now, okay, so as promised, we've also got a series of short video interviews from sector leaders and experts to give you a sense of the other news and issues in the sector. Bear with the sound and vision quality for some of these. I shot and edited most of these myself, so there's the occasional background chatter and noise, and hopefully not too much wonky camera work. Thank you particularly to the the Impact Institute for inviting us to their recent social impact summit, which I attended in Sydney, and there's some material from there. So the first video is one that actually David will be quite familiar with, is that continuing battle for charities for laws to enshrine their right to advocate. The Stronger Charities Alliance, which has been at this effort now for 9 years, are behind it, and they recently were landed in Canberra for a lobbying blitz during a sitting week. I'll let them explain.
So across the country every day, our charities are helping people eat, learn, heal, find a home.
Well, I think charities are at the heart of most communities in Australia.
We see the challenges that people are facing, the things that are working, the things that are not working.
We're in every local community.
And in addition to those critical services that we provide, we are also speaking up about the reasons why these people that we work with are being left behind.
Charitable advocacy is one of the main ways that the sovereign voices of mob make its way from community to the halls of Parliament.
If we're not in there really lobbying and pushing for what's best for society as a whole. A lot of things that we count on, nature, a safe climate, health, etc., they will be undone.
We don't want Australia to become like the US, where if you're seen as critical, your survival is put under pressure.
Many charities still believe that they can't speak out.
For people to reach their full potential, we need their voices to be heard.
Really what you're doing when you're silencing charitable advocacy, you start to lose the quality of government that everyone deserves.
The need to protect charities and the right to advocate, absolutely critical in any democracy right now.
We're calling on the government to pass legislation to protect charities' voices this term of Parliament.
Righto, everyone. Now, there will be a link to our report of the Protect Charities Voices effort in the list of mentioned reports in the show notes. So that will be in the back at the end of the slides. So on a related matter, one of Australia's top experts in charity law is the Melbourne Law School's Professor Matthew Harding. He's the author of the plain English analysis Charities and Politics, which calls for stronger charity laws, especially around advocacy. I spoke to him after his keynote for the independent think tank Per Capita's regular John Cain lunch series. Let's listen to him explain exactly what he wants.
The story for charities has been that there has been inadequate protection for their advocacy activity, legally speaking. And in that area of advocacy, governments have been able to pull levers in ways that have made charities reluctant to speak out. It is a very complicated body of law. It's built up over hundreds of years. It's the product of judge-made law, legislation, regulation. It operates at federal level and at state and territory level. And I think many in the sector would say it's far too complicated. There's no right and wrong time to be looking to get legislative reform that can further clarify the law. There is just now. When you've got an active charities sector that's keen to contribute to that process, that's good. I think when you've got a government that's willing and open to having that discussion and engaging in that discussion, that's good. So those conditions are all to be welcomed. One of the things that charity governors have to do is to get to grips with what the law requires of them. That's what good governance looks like. Where that needs to happen in an environment where it's not entirely clear what the law is asking and where the law is changing, then there's money and there's time that has to be expended on that effort. And that's money and time that these organisations don't have in many cases because they're on tight budgets and they're trying to direct all their efforts to helping the people they serve.
All right. As with many of these pieces, you can read more about Professor Harding's views in the show notes. You can also see, there's also a link to his full address at that John Cain lunch. Right. Oh, actually, one of the great things about doing this job is being able to get to some great stories across the countries. I actually attended the Social Impact Summit in Sydney recently. That was hosted by the Impact Institute, and we were actually gold partners of that event, and that brought together CEOs, leaders, government officials, advocates, and all kinds of thinkers, our people. And one of the highlights was a great keynote from Professor Arnold Dix. You may have heard of him. He's a tunnel engineer and the rescuer of 41 men trapped under a Himalayan mountain. But his message was that beyond technology, honesty and humility can actually help overcome overwhelming odds. Let's have a look.
We're going to rescue these men. When I arrived here, I said there's 41 men coming home and there's no one else going to be hurt, and that's the mission.
I rise to acknowledge a truly great Australian, Professor Arnold Dix.
I'm here to recount what I think is a miraculous rescue in which the outcome, the miracle if you like, was only possible because we combined technical, scientific and engineering with the social dimensions. I think belief is incredibly important, and I think reductionist thinking, scientific engineering thinking, often excludes the importance of us as an emotional being, as well as being a rational being. This audience were like, oh my goodness, he's a technical dude, but, well, he's okay. We'll have him here. Other people could stand up and say what I said, but they would be dismissed. This is my field of expertise, and I'm a dad, and I'm going to help. I'm going to be part of the team, and we're going to do this together. And suddenly other hearts come with all of their expertise as well. It took a huge team to do this. I was just one little part of it, but I somehow or other got caught up in the middle of the hope bit. When I was growing up, my dear mum, she always taught me when you're in somebody else's house, you play by their rules. And for me, while I was in the Himalayas doing that rescue, I was Hindu. It wasn't just that I was paying lip service to the local gods. I was praying to the Hindu gods. I was kneeling at the Hindu temple in the land of the Hindu gods. I was Hindu. So this to me is part of what I think is really important. When you're a part of a team, you don't follow a checklist. You immerse yourself in that team and become part of them. I was part of the team. That was genuine. It wasn't some checklist thing. I think the thing that I'd like them to take away is confidence in themselves. I'm not asking anyone to go off and do a tunnel rescue, and I'm not even wanting to do another one myself. One per lifetime is enough, like that. Right? I want them to go home, look in the mirror, and ask themselves, what would the 5-year-old version of me say about whatever the issue is that's troubling them? Because I believe that inside each of us, we have inherent, hardwired decency, morality, kindness. We understand what it is to be a human being, and that compass is what gives us strength.
As you can imagine, there were tears and cheers during that presentation, and you won't be surprised that during the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's recent visit to Australia, they announced a joint Australia-Bollywood deal to make that story into a film. Now, last week, I attended the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission's Governing for Good Forum, and the biggest announcement on the day came from the Charities Minister himself, Andrew Leigh. I'll let him tell you directly what that's all about.
Today, I'm chuffed to announce that from October 2026 to June 2028, the Tax Commissioner will support the ACNC Commissioner to deliver a new Charity Resilience and Productivity project. I thank Tax Commissioner Rob Heffron for that support. The project will help the ACNC build capability where the need is greatest. Among small and volunteer-run groups, newly registered charities, organisations working across language barriers, and charities in rural and regional Australia. It will strengthen the ACNC's work under its second statutory object, supporting and sustaining a robust, vibrant, independent and innovative charity sector. That object is sometimes overshadowed by the ACNC's important compliance work. Yet the ACNC's job is also educational and enabling. It helps people who've agreed to serve on a board understand what the role requires. It helps a newly registered charity avoid turning a bookkeeping mistake into a governance crisis. It helps an organisation use new technology without exposing its donors, clients or volunteers to needless risk. The Charity Resilience and Productivity Project will allow the ACNC to extend that education further.
Oh, right. Well, hopefully this announcement will make a big difference to the 6,000 odd charities that registered to avoid having to comply with the ATO's new regulatory requirements. That's kind of what's driven that boost. I've actually produced a news report about that change, which also is included in the slides from the show. Incidentally, we also ran a chapter of Leigh's Shortest History of Innovation, his book, in our most recent monthly newsletter. You can claim a $5 discount as a member of community directors. That link is also included. Now, another interview I conducted at the Social Impact Summit was with Katherine Raskob. She's the Chief Executive of the Fundraising Institute, Australasia. She gave us some really interesting insights into the latest fundraising trends and believes growing demands for evidence by donors is actually a good opportunity. Let's hear what she has to say.
Even though there is this feeling that we're operating in a low trust environment, in fact, the research does show that it's actually quite stable. And so if you look at Roy Morgan, Edelman Trust Barometer, Charities Aid Foundation, the CAF World Giving Index, we're seeing some stability there in trust. There's some little ups and downs, but there's not huge decreases in trust. And I think what we're seeing then is actually we don't need to like rescue, the reputation of our sector, but we need to continue to build it and probably work to a slightly higher bar. I think we're seeing some challenging conditions economically amongst Australians, and we're seeing that from some of the research we do with our research partner, More Strategic. So people are saying that they're feeling the pinch from inflation and higher prices, and also some worry and concern with worldwide issues and wars taking place. But by and large, they're continuing to give and to give in similar amounts. And so we need to continue to invest in fundraising. We know that 85% of all revenue that's garnered with charities in this country is from a fundraising ask. And so if you don't have enough trained professional fundraisers doing that ask, building those relationships, stewarding those donors, showing donors the impact, then it will be a challenge for you to continue to fundraise into the future. So that's really the most important thing, is making those investments and making the investment for the full cost of that resource. Our parents and our grandparents, they were sort of habitual annual givers, regular givers, and they went, yep, I'll give you this gift and go off and use it wisely and tell me how it's going, along the way or at the end. But I think increasingly donors in younger generations are demanding a lot more. They want to be really confident that the money that they're giving and their generosity is actually making a change. How is that change being made? And is it a systemic change that's actually going to make a difference in the world, not just in the one program after one program? So I think that's a shift that we're starting to see. And that's why social impact reporting, and not just outcomes, but actual impact reporting, is so critical for charitable fundraising organizations to consider.
One of the things that David didn't mention is that now fundraising is actually listed as a formal occupation now. That's a change that happened this week, I think. I've also got a longer report, of course, on that issue that Katherine Raskob was talking about in the slides. Since we're talking about generosity, I should mention that we're heading to the Philanthropy Australia conference next month, and I'll bring you some reports from that. But also it makes me want to ask you another question, which is going to hopefully pop up in another poll now, and that's basically asking what if you had a message for some of the major philanthropists in Australia, what would it be? So I'll let you have a chance to scan through and choose what you would like to say about that. And while you're doing that, I would also like you to have a look at this next video. So it's basically saying that the not-for-profit sector's greatest asset in the age of artificial intelligence is its ability to see clients as humans, not just data points. But that asset is under threat, according to the ACOSS president and Sacred Heart Mission Chief Executive Hung Vo. She spoke to community directors at the Info Exchange Technology for Social Justice conference earlier this year, and I thought you'd be interested in hearing what she's got to say.
To all the non-profit leaders out there, in this world where it's just so fast-paced and everywhere we look there's pressure to go AI, to use technology, I think it's really important to pause and to remember why we're here and what our superpower is. Our superpower in the sector is about always thinking about the human, thinking about the person who we're here to serve, and always reminding ourselves that that is the most important part of even developing technology, is come back to the person, understand what it is that we're trying to do to support them, and ensure that we have lived experience voice in the way that we think about technology, because technology is a tool, whereas it's the human that we really need to deeply listen to. With the increase in complexity of people coming to our services, I think it's really important that whatever service we offer, whether it's a meals program, whether it's outreach, to remember that often people come with very low digital literacy. There's so much pressure on not-for-profits to use technology to make our work more efficient, to be faster. But in fact, when we're working with people, the most important thing is to slow down, to actually take the time and as we often say in our sector, to start from where people are at. And that's really the most critical thing, particularly in a place where we're so driven by technology. We need to slow down and remember that the people we're here to serve may not have the literacy that we have as workers.
Okay, and also in the show notes, you can read more about what Hung Vo had to say, and there's a link to her full speech that she made at that conference. And it makes sense that now we back up Hung Vo's thoughts with a good example of what can be done with AI. What about an AI assistant designed with the help of frontline care workers who use it to save hours of admin at one of Australia's largest not-for-profits? I'll let Yoe Esguerra of Uniting Care explain what that's all about. Have a look.
So currently, Buddy is actually in the hands of 1,200 staff across our home and community care services, across the regions New South Wales and ACT. And we just recently extended it further to our mission and chaplaincy as well, business area. And we're looking at extending that to our residential aged care, service areas, as well as mental health. The question really that we had to answer and address was, how can we make their day easier and simpler, where they can actually focus on providing care rather than doing the documentation, rather than going through multiple systems, trying to find the information. And that in itself causes a lot of burden, cognitive overload, but it also stresses them out. So I always go back to the human factor that needs to be, considered as part of the design where we want to make impact. So that's where Buddy is really making that impact or frontline. It's one of our values in Uniting is to be bold, to really lean in where innovation can make a difference and try it out, be innovative, be creative, but also do that in a very safe manner. During the design of Buddy, we actually partnered with our legal and data governance groups to ensure that we adhere, the design itself adheres to all of these policies and standards and regulations. And we actually made sure that our policies encapsulated the safe, ethical, and responsible use. One, really understand the core of your problem. Second, identify your lowest hanging fruit to make sure low risk as you experiment, but also show the benefits and get the buy-in. From there, it's just going to propel forward. And lastly, please, please, please partner closely with your people and your frontline teams.
I actually also did a report about that tool, which won the best use of AI for community impact at the Australian Not-for-Profit Technology Awards and scooped a swag of other awards. I think and our final video report is kind of on a similar theme. It's another great use of AI, but this one is a client-facing tool, and it's from the nation's leading drug and alcohol information provider. The Alcohol and Drug Foundation's Cinzia Morocco explains how their drug info bot, DIB, is changing the way it educates people, especially young people, about drugs, and at the same time is uncovering new data about attitudes. Check this out.
So anyone who comes and uses DIB does not have to enter any personal information. So we really want to break down the barriers to accessing important information and support around alcohol and other drugs. In addition, DIB is monitored. So every conversation is monitored, not only by bots, but also by humans. And we're backed up by our AI policy, which is cross-organisation. It's been in place for only 18 months, but has actually gone through its third update. DIB provides us this really rich information about the types of questions that people are asking about alcohol and other drugs. And this is really rich information that we can use to create more content, identify content gaps, or provide information about drugs that are actually getting quite a lot of questions. So meeting the needs of people outside of the website as well as those who come to the website. We worked really hard to make DIB accessible. So the look of DIB the language that it's using, the tone of voice is all really important to ensuring that we are breaking down the barriers to people accessing important information about alcohol and other drugs. I think we can learn from each other in this space. We are all learning and trying to adapt to the rapid changes that are happening in technology, especially when it comes to information provision. In our space, information about alcohol and other drugs, if not given correctly, can actually have devastating effects. So we're really happy to share our learnings around how we keep DIB safe and the people who access its information safe as well.
And you know that I'm going to tell you I've written a report on that. That'll appear in the show notes. I'll send you that. Also, at the end of that, you'll see a link on 43 examples of other not-for-profits using AI. So great inspiration there. Talking about tech, you'll be interested to know we're continuing to work on reports to inform not-for-profits about how to beef up their cybersecurity while not sacrificing digital access. That's tricky, right? And so there's a new support group. I think we've got a slide here. It's called the Not-for-Profit Cyber Uplift Community of Practice. Okay, that's a bit of a mouthful, but what it aims to do is what it says. So opportunities to learn, share and access events and resources. Our Executive Director, Adele Stowe-Lindner, actually jointly chairs its advisory group, and the effort's being launched next Wednesday. And there's a free webinar that explains how it all works. You can follow the QR code on the screen or tap on the link in the slides that will appear after the show. Now, I'm not sure if we threw up the results of the philanthropy survey, but I'm sure that you'll be very interested in that. Oh, look at that. That doesn't surprise me. People want money spent on the core costs. But look, I'll be using that to inform our upcoming philanthropy newsletter. So further comments as well, if you throw them on the chat, if you think that there's issues that we should be following, I'll be looking at that chat. So please do that. I want to talk, while we've still got time, of some of the other work that we're doing here at Community Directors. We've got our weekly news and we've got our monthly newsletter, which so we've got the weekly news that comes out in the Community Advocate, the monthly Community Directors Intelligence, which always has a specific theme. Subscribe to that if you don't already get it. In the slides, you'll also see some of the hot stories, some of the big stories that are appearing in the Community Advocate this week. So the stuff on trusts, which we mentioned, a rather alarming story about an advocacy group that was cyber attacked and harassed with some vile material. That hopefully the cyber issue that we're producing will help you address some of those. Also, some funding is always hot topics in the Community Directors Intelligence. We always run a separate theme each month. The last one was on innovation. The next one will be on philanthropy. As I mentioned, we're working on one around cybersecurity, and you can go to our back issues as well, and you can get some great intel there. The best way to get our newsletters is to become a Community Directors member. That is free. Also, I should mention, we are on socials. You can follow us on several platforms. There's information on those show notes as well. So finally, I just thank you all for tuning in. I really appreciate your time. I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you particularly for Lockie for the tech support. Don't forget to do our survey of what you think about the show. A post-event email will come soon with slides on how to watch a replay and to scan through some of those reports that I mentioned. Thanks for watching. The Not-for-Profit Agenda will air again in November. Until then, thanks for joining and keep reading our newsletters. Thank you very much.